So I just wanted to thank all of you for being here tonight. I really appreciate all of what you do. So I raised my kids in the church, and so we took full advantage of Sunday school and vacation Bible school. We volunteered, so it's all okay. So I'm glad I'm able to be here tonight and try to give you some of the knowledge that I have gained over the past 18 years or so. That's right, 18 years. So I've been at this quite a while. So I have a lot of knowledge, but it's not terribly organized. So this would be helpful if I'm going off on a tangent and I'm not really addressing a question that you may have. Please interrupt me. So, any questions before I begin? Any answers? Who has answers? There it is. All right, that's a great answer, actually. Okay, so my favorite topic to discuss is emotions. Does everyone have an emotion sheet? Just in case you were wondering how many emotions you have, see, it's very simple. It's 8. There are 8 emotions, and so I reference emotions quite a bit in my practice and just the way I discuss. And so I just thought I would just go over these really fast, really quick. So there's 8 basic emotions, and the first 3 are orienting reflexes. Okay, and these are the emotions that get our attention, right? So if you're walking along in the woods and you see a flashing light in the background, what happens? You stop and you pay attention to what's going on, and it's kind of interesting. What could that be? And so interest is an important emotion. It's the emotion that we want our children to have more of often, right? Because it seems as if they're distracted by everything out the window or distracted with something inside. But we want them to be paying attention to what we're trying, the task. Okay? So that light in the distance, if it starts traveling toward you at a fast pace, then what happens? And there's fear, right? Like, what is this light? Why is it coming at me so fast? And so fear is an intense increase in that level of sort of brain energy. Okay, and fear is an important emotion because probably what you might see with youngsters is this particular problematic behavior called aggression. Has anyone ever seen a child be aggressive before? Right? All of us, including me. Okay, so aggression. And aggression has been studied quite extensively by psychologists. And there's 2 main reasons why a child may be aggressive. And one of those reasons, and this is a 50-cent term, fear approach. Doesn't that sound technical? So what does that mean? So you've heard of fight or flight, right? So if you're threatened, your body goes into, all right, am I going to fight this threat, or am I going to flight or run away from this threat? And so a child who is aggressive may be stuck in this sort of fight mode, okay? And sometimes it's not entirely clear what they're afraid of. So you don't always know because you don't really know the child's history. So maybe the child has a reason to be afraid for themselves, but not for the average child. So fear is an important emotion, and fear actually, a little bit of self-disclosure. Fear is, once I started really studying emotion, I found that fear was underneath a lot of my kind of negative emotions. So some days I'd be kind of in an angry mood, or I would get angry. And I discovered later that it was because I was afraid, right? Afraid that something was going to happen, that I wasn't going to finish on time, or some task wasn't going to get done. And that often resulted in anger, and I discovered it was fear. And so instead of just dealing with the anger, you deal with the fear, okay? Startle is a definite emotion, but it's not one to really spend a whole lot of time with. It's sort of like fear. The way that startle affects me, I go to all the USM home football games, and what happens after a USM touchdown? The cannon. And the first time the cannon went off, I didn't know that was going to happen, and I jumped, and it was really embarrassing, and I felt a lot of shame. So now I look for the cannon to go off, and it doesn't scare me anymore. All right. Just jumping back to interest for a second. Interest is an important emotion because it's also a solution. Okay, interest is the antidote. Do you see that little phrase there under interest. So what does that mean? There's only so much space in a person's mind for emotion. So if a child is showing up to your class and they just seem to be in a really sour, bitter mood, right? So the negativity, the anger, the depression, whatever else is underneath it is just occupying all of it. And so what you want to do is try to push that back just a bit with something positive, like interest, because there's only so much space in the psyche for emotion. And so how do you generate interest in a child? So that's the question. And how do I find something interesting? How do I make the situation more novel to kind of push back that negative emotion? And this is something you probably do instinctively as parents and as children's workers. And another really fun emotion is joy, right? So that's the feel-good emotion. That's the emotion of communion. That's the emotion of togetherness. That's the emotion of relief. If you're really tense about a certain situation and maybe you're waiting for a phone call and you've been worried about it and it's gone your mind, it's created a lot of sort of negativity. You get the phone call, it's a wonderful phone call, everything's great. What do you feel? That's so relieving. That really feels good. And there's just many different sources of joy. A reliable source of joy is communion. Okay? So being with others, belonging, right? People want to belong. They want to be part of something. And so communion is a reliable source of joy, and that is definitely something that you offer, that is offered at church, is communion. You know, and I always tell people that if nothing else, if there's no humans that you can be in communion with, there's, right? In addiction, we would say higher power. And here you would say God, Jesus, right? This is, okay. But I used to work in addictions. I veered off into addictions in 2012 and worked there for about 7 years or so. So I did a lot of lectures on emotions to adult addiction patients. And joy was something we talked a lot about. So, how am I doing so far? Does this make sense? You can tell me if it doesn't, I can take it. All right, it does. Good. All right, so joy. Different ways of generating joy. Again, there's only so much room in the child's mind for emotion. So if a lot of negativity, build interest. Okay? Or create more joy, connection. There's other things, right? Breathing is a reliable source of joy. And this is something you might find fascinating. Has anyone ever heard of the vagus nerve? Yeah, all right, so it's a nerve. It's one of the nerves that begins in the brain. It's called the cranial nerve. And so the vagus nerve travels down the neck, and it creates a lot of, it's the nerve of relaxation. Okay, whenever everything seems to be at peace, seems to be settled, that nerve is activated, and it's sort of the opposite of the fight or flight, which is called the adrenaline, right? So it turns out the vagus nerve is situated right around different pockets of nerve fibers for communication, right? The nerves that innervate our neck muscles to get us to turn, to pay attention to who is talking, innervate our hearing, voice, tongue, voice box. And so communication, there's actually science behind how communication stimulates joy, stimulates the vagus nerve, stimulates relaxation. And also right around that area is breathing. So you often hear people say what? Yes, this is what every therapist will tell you when you go in and you're having a bad day. What do they say? Let's breathe, yeah. Let's count your breaths, right? And so breathing is a useful exercise. And there is science. There's good science behind breathing, and breathing also stimulates that vagus nerve. Interest and joy are happiness. Okay? A great example of happiness is, has anyone ever played peekaboo with a child, with an infant? Isn't that fun? So what happens with peekaboo, right? So you're hiding your face, okay? And the infant is just at a stage where they don't quite know that when your face is not there that you haven't disappeared and gone away somewhere. So it's a skill they're just learning. It's something they have to learn, and the nerves are connected. And then you take your hands away, and there's my face again. Oh, how much fun is that? And so the interest is created when you put hands in front of the face. Hey, where'd the person go? And then you're back again. And so that's just a great example of happiness, joy, peekaboo. So, all right, and then there's that which steals happiness. And these are the happiness stealers. And there's two of those. There's disgust. Okay? Now, some of you may think disgust is just the emotion you have whenever you're maybe a toddler and you come across a piece of broccoli and you do what? You just spit it up on your plate. And why can't we do that still as adults? It seems like we should still be able to do that, right? We can't. We used to, but what's that? All right, got an amen. So disgust. But we don't use disgust just for things that we don't like something that's been sitting in the garbage for a long time, or something we find in our teenager's room that they didn't throw away. Disgust applies to other people. So that same emotion that is applied to that which we want to expel gets applied to other people. And so disgust is the emotion of wanting to be away. I want you away from me. Okay? This is an important emotion to understand. And it's not just because, kids may experience this emotion, but also, we grown-ups may experience this emotion. It's an emotion of something that is very different from us. Okay, so if you're walking down the street in a big city and you see a teenager with all sorts of different attire and piercings and whatnot, there may be that initial impulse to just want to be away, right? And that's that feeling that this is very different, I want that away. And that's disgust. And, we can often use our interest, right? Interest is the antidote, isn't it? We've discussed that, to push through that disgust and really get to know the person, because often people are more complex than what our first impression. And this would go for kids as well. And then the big one, so shame. That's my favorite emotion, right? Because this is the emotion that pays the bills for mental health, doesn't it? So chronic disappointment, I didn't get enough of this or that, or why can't life be different? Why can't this be different? So this is the emotion of when desire is unfulfilled. This is the emotion of, I kind of want this, but I don't. I'm sort of attached to it, but I know I shouldn't be. And it's just the emotion of attachment. I always say shame is the emotion of attachment. It's what pulls us to something. And disgust is the emotion of detachment. It sets us loose. But how shame applies to working with kids that's the other side of the coin for aggression. So what was the first one? Fear approach, right? Child gets afraid and they go after what it is they're afraid of. So they get aggressive because they're attacking. They're on the fight. Shame is the emotion of what we call frustrative non-reward. So that's a very complicated way of saying what? You didn't get what you want. Okay, think of a scenario when a child has frustrative non-reward. So 10-year-old playing a video game. And video games these days are not what they used to be, right? These aren't Pac-Man. These are very intense, engrossing video games. And then it's time to shut the video game off. What happens with 10-year-olds? They're not happy, are they? So maybe they hem and haw and huff. Maybe they get aggressive, right? And so shame is another source of aggression. And it's also an emotion that I think is important for us adults to understand when we're working with kids, because this is the emotion that allows us to be a target. It's the emotion of creating a self. If I have a self, then I'm allowing myself to be a target of a child who wants to, say something mean to me and does what? Hurts my feelings. And so we get disappointed. I'm disappointed that this 5-year-old is not, appreciative of the time I'm spending. And in fact, not only are they not appreciative, they're saying mean things to me, and that's hurt my feelings. And as you'll see in a second, all of these emotions lead to the overwhelmers. So shame is the emotion of disappointment, a very important one. And then there's the overwhelmers. And so this is why people often show up to the doctor's office, right? Depression, distress. And so that's fine if you're depressed, but for me it doesn't stop there. I'm wanting to know what's underneath the depression. And what's usually underneath is another emotion. And the two most common emotions underneath are fear and shame. Okay? So when you see a child who is depressed, how can you tell the child is depressed? Well, if they're crying, right? Of course. Or if they're irritable, or you can just kind of tell, frustrated, kind of sad. Okay? And so distress means there's something overwhelming. Something is overwhelming the child, and then the task is to find out what is overwhelming. And often it's either shame or fear. And then there's anger. So kids usually go straight to anger, don't they? So anger, aggression, again, this is the result usually of either fear approach, or shame, frustrated. What was it again? Frustrated, something. You remember what I said. It's on the recording, right? We can just play it back later. Okay. Does that make sense? I really like these emotions. So it usually works in almost every situation. And some people say there's only two emotions, bad and good. When I was in training, there was a poster of about 72 emotions. And you told the person to go and pick one. It just seemed overwhelming. Okay. All right, so we'll refer to those. Okay, so I am a child psychiatrist, so some of you may be wondering, what advice would a child psychiatrist give to parenting or handling misbehavior? So thankfully my wife isn't here, because she would say that I really don't know, and she's told me that for 18 years, that you don't really know what you're doing. So anyway, I kind of do know what I don't want to discourage you. Go ahead.
Any helpful suggestions, or how do you take a group of individuals like we are all working with 6th grade or younger, and with a limited amount of time, what are some ways you can discern the interest of these individuals? Because a lot of times we are forced in some sense to treat them as a group. It's always nice when you can treat each one individually, but sometimes we just don't have the opportunity to do that. So you get on interest a lot, trying to pull someone in by making them interested. I'm guessing, is that the right way? By finding that individual is interested. What are some helpful hints like that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So you have a group of kids, and you have a set curriculum that you're using.
Correct.
And that's designed.
Two adults with a group of young children.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to pull away, and some of us, I'm sure, have some children that need one-on-one attention.
Right.
And sometimes it's difficult.
Now, would that be the entire class is not interested, or just a few students out of the group? So just a few?
It's one or two in the group.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So can you give me just an example of maybe a situation, like anyone give me an example of a situation where this sort of thing happened in a class?
I had one happen the other day. I'm working with 3rd and 4th graders, and what we try to do is we try to structure the hour, and it was time to transition from one station to the next, per se, and that individual refused to transition to the other group, all within the same classroom. And I caught myself initially wanting that student to do what I said, and that means go to the next table. But then I backed up and said, as long as this person's not disrupting the class and hurting other children and behaving at this one place, we're going to move to the next station. This person's going to stay right here. That's how we had to leave it. I didn't.
No, yes, that's excellent.
Not sit down and how you feel and how you feel and how can I help. I didn't take the time to do that.
That's exactly what I would have recommended that you do. So, see, you answered your own question. So you already instinctively knew.
But my initial response was,
All right, so your initial response. So your initial response was anger, right?
was frustration.
Frustration, which is, it's another way of saying anger, is frustration. And that, what was the emotion underneath? It was probably disappointment, I'm guessing.
That or lack of cooperation.
Right. So, so you had emotional awareness. You recognized that emotion, and then you took the step of ignoring the power struggle that the child tried to engage you, and you moved on to the next. And that's really exactly what I would. That's a great segue, because that's just about what I was going to discuss. But that's really, because obviously if we could somehow go to each child and give them each an individual lesson, that's not hard. Just find a bunch more adults in the community, and you'll have each child has their own teacher. See?
But I guess at the end of the day, did we help that child?
Did you help the child? In some ways, well, I don't know. I guess in some ways I would say that you did, because you see, what happens with kids is they get locked into a way, and this is true of adults too, they get locked into a way of relating to others, and it's not adaptive, it's not very functional. This isn't a way that you're going to succeed in life, by always being oppositional to people. And so what you did was you gave them a different experience. You didn't get into a power struggle with the child and reinforce. You see, power struggles, believe it or not, that actually is what some kids are seeking, because that's how they belong. That's what they know. Maybe their home is full of power struggles, and so they're used to getting into power struggles with people, and maybe there's just a bunch of people in the home. We get this quite often at the hospital, and so there's lots of conflict and stress, and so it's what they understand. And the idea of following along politely and compliantly is just foreign to them. And the way they understand life is to be in some sort of drama, some sort of stress, right? And so that's what they were trying to pull you into. And so you didn't take the bait, and you moved on. And so they experienced something different. Hey, here's a grown-up that didn't get into that power struggle. And so every time they have, it's called a corrective experience. So every time they have a corrective experience, then you sort of dull that tendency. So I think in that sense, it actually can be helpful. And, kids are paying attention, even when they don't seem to be. And so my guess is the child heard what you were teaching, even though they didn't seem to be. So yeah, I don't know, would anyone disagree with me? I think, what's your name? Brian. I think what Brian did was actually right on target, identifying his emotions, not caving into them, and reacting in such a way that would add fuel to the fire, and instead just sidestepping the power struggle and moving on. So, what's that? Exactly.
If they're not hurting anybody, and you walk away, they're not becoming a spectacle for their peers either.
Right,
You
right.
save the kids from that.
And there are ways you could fine-tune what you did. So there are communication skills you can try. They won't always be successful, but we can talk about that some more. So, I statements, for example. So an I statement is a way of communicating that. Really, the main point of an I statement is to slow down the communication, to let you to be able to take a few steps to think about what's going on, and what's the best way to communicate this situation to the child. And it's when I feel because. When I feel because. I do this little dance with it when I'm teaching teenagers who are about to have a family session. When I feel because. When I feel because. So when you aren't following along, I feel discouraged because I don't think you're able to fully take part in this exercise. Okay? So that's an I statement. You're explaining to the child exactly what's going on in a very logical way. See, that's the important thing about the emotions, is you want to take the emotion out of this as much as you can, especially the negative emotion. The positive is fine, but the negative you want to remove. So by doing an I statement, you're being very logical. When you are acting in such an oppositional way, I feel discouraged. So you're telling them how it's making you feel. And then why? Because you're not getting... And so what the child hears is, hey, this is a grown-up who's actually respectfully talking to me. I was expecting somebody to yell, right? To point their finger and do all sorts of stuff. But this person actually talked to me like I was, in many ways, a fellow adult. And so that's something you can try. The other thing that you'll see in the handout is giving choices. Choices are great because kids, toddlers, children, especially teenagers, they like to think that they're in what? Control. Like they're in charge of their destiny. And so this is where we get into power struggles, right? Because we want to be in control and they want to be in control. I can tell you, teenagers think they're in control. Teenagers think they're adults. Whether or not we believe it, they think it. And probably children too. So you give a choice. So what would be a choice in that situation for this particular child? And it's like you're giving a choice of two good outcomes for you. So you can pay attention in this seat, or if you'd like, you can sit over here and pay attention in this seat. Which do you choose? Which one is best for you? I get to choose. And so they get a sense that they're in charge, but they're really not. It's kind of tricky, isn't it? But you're giving them a choice of two really good options for you, but it works often. And so those are some extra things you can do. But at the end of the day, it may just be that you have to do just what you did and ignore and move on. Maybe go back to the child after class and sort of do an I statement. Hey, when I saw you acting this way, I felt this way because... And this gets to the other part that you'll find in the little... This, by the way, is from this book. I should give a shout out to this book. I have no royalties. This is not me. This is someone else. And it's a very good book. It's very inexpensive on Amazon, $12 or so. And it's... This one's called The Parent's Handbook. There's one for preschoolers, and then there's one for teenagers. Both are a little different, all three. So I really believe in this. This strategy for parents is based mostly on the relationship. This psychologist named Alfred Adler. And so the handout is just some highlights from the book. So in addition to the I statement, which is what? What's the dance? When I feel because. In addition to the I statement, there's reflective listening. And this is, in addition to shame, this is the other way mental health professionals make their money, is we just reflectively I'm giving away all our secrets here. I shouldn't do this. What's that? To the camera too? So person comes into the office, they sit down, their eyes are downcast, and they say, "You would not believe the day I've had." And so a reflective statement would be, "Wow, it seems to me that you're having a really awful day. Man, people just feel like, hey, somebody listened to me, somebody just connected with me. That's terrific, that's excellent." Again, I'm stimulating that vagus nerve. just by being there and connecting. And so that's another thing. It's just very simple. So you say, Billy, I can see that you're having a really awful night tonight. It's just something just must be really stressing you out today. And just saying that will often generate conversation. And they'll tell you what it is they're stressed out, and it feels good. And so, again, making that connection. So maybe the next time they'll want to belong more with your class and will be more inclined to sort of go along with the group norms and pay attention. So, does that make sense? So those are the things I would, but you did an excellent job, actually. So, yeah. Any other questions? I'm not really talking about specific diagnoses or anything, you know. The DSM-5 is a guide. I do have it on my desk, but I'll look at more the big picture personally. So when you're having a class and one of the children is misbehaving, first thing to do is stop, drop, and identify the goal of the misbehavior. Okay? So, if you will, turn to page... there's actually not a page number, but it says chapter 1. I think, well, maybe. I think for this, maybe this one page, it's not. I don't see it. So, oh yeah, very. Page 19. You ever do that when you're trying to solve a jumble or something? And of course. All right, page 19. So these are the 4 main goals of misbehavior, as per Dr. Don Dinkmeyer, the psychologist who wrote this book. Okay, so how do you feel when a child is misbehaving? So if you look to the far right, goal, attention seeking. Okay? Kids often want to seek attention. There's a phase in human development where we like to be the center of attention. We want to be the center of the world. And that's kind of the toddler phase, right? When a child sort of discovers that they're separate from everyone and hey, I like being the center of attention. And sometimes kids get enough of that, sometimes not. The ones that don't will often kind of be stuck in this pattern of wanting to get attention. And they'll get it in lots of different ways. They'll get it in positive ways, or they'll get it in not so positive ways. Does anyone know an adult who seems to always be seeking attention? That doesn't happen, right? It happens sometimes. You can say yes, it happens. Okay. All right, so attention. So how does a person feel when they're around someone who's constantly looking for attention? You feel bothered and annoyed. Okay, so can you think of a situation where a child is seeking a lot of attention? Like constantly asking to use the restroom or to get a drink of water or to sharpen their pencil or things like that. So we're bothered, we're annoyed, and our response is usually we want to, return negative feedback, reminding, nagging, scolding, and then it stops, but then it comes back because we paid attention to the negative behavior. And then there's power struggle. Has anyone been in a power struggle with a child? Maybe? This happens a lot with teenagers, doesn't it? So this is feeling angry, threatened, and we want to, stand up for ourselves. We want to punish and fight back. And then it sometimes make the situation worse. Revenge. So this is the part where we have that sense of self inside that's a target. And so we want to get back and punish the child for, being vindictive toward us. And then there's the inadequacy. This is a child that just gives up and they just kind of want to sit and they don't want to try. Okay, so where was I going with that? So to identify, so look at page 41, the next page. So to identify a child's goal, look at how it makes you feel, how you respond to the misbehavior, and then what the child does in response. Okay? Look down at number 4. So helping the child take part, giving choices, being fair, and let me just... now I know where I was going with this. Does everyone have page 42? I should ask for volunteers to read this, shouldn't I? Anyone else have an example of recent misbehavior? We could do some role play up here if we have to. No. Let me see if I can think of them. Probably no. Let's just imagine the situation, shall we? So, little Jimmy talks back. Okay? So what happens when little Jimmy talks back? How do we feel? What happens when we tell them to get in line and they look at us and yell no? What's the emotion that just drummed up? Look at the, let's see. Do you feel bothered, annoyed, angry, or hopeless? You feel angry, okay.
So this chart right here is the goal. Is that what you're suggesting? That's what the child's goal?
That's what this child is seeking.
The others would be how people respond.
Right. So, how do I feel is what you are feeling. You as the adult. The way that you normally respond that's another clue as to what the goal is. So if you find yourself constantly having to remind a child or nag, then based on this, the goal of the child is attention seeking. Okay? And then if you turn to page 42, on the third column, what can parents do when a child is seeking attention? Don't give attention, right? Ignore it. Ignore when possible. Don't wait on the child. And then give attention at other times when the child is doing what you expect. So when the child is actually taking part and cooperating, that's when you want to pay attention. Okay? Now, some may say, well, we should praise the child, right? You're such a good boy today. Well, Dr. Dinkmeyer would say that that's actually not a great thing to do because it's putting a value on the child that the child can't always meet. And then when they don't meet it, they feel discouraged and likely to go back to anger. So instead of saying, wow, you're such a great kid today, say, I really appreciate that you're cooperating with the class today. I can tell that you're very interested today in what we're doing. And so instead, I just commented on what the child's doing instead of giving a label to the child and just saying you're a great kid. So that's what you do for attention. You ignore if you can, and then pay attention to the child at other times when they're doing something right. This works for adults too. It turns out we just never grow out of our childhood. Trust me, I've worked with folks in their 60s and 70s, and yeah, there are times when you wonder whether you're working with a teenager. So anyway, power struggle. So what happens with power struggle? So let's think of an example. So temper tantrums, demands. I want to play this video game. I'm not done. Okay? You can't make me turn it off. Or passive aggressive. Or there's no aggressive like passive aggressive, right? Just deciding that they're just going to not participate and just sit there. Stubbornness. So, what do we often do in those situations? We push, fight back, or give in, right? Which continues to reinforce the behavior. But instead, refusing to fight or give in. Okay? It's kind of like judo. I've never taken judo. I tried to take karate. They actually have a karate class at the YMCA, and my right knee reminded me why I should not do that. But I was smart enough not to take judo. I do think there is a judo class in Purvis. So I hope there's no one in here. Anyway, so judo, one thing with judo and jiu-jitsu and aikido is instead of fighting the person, you just kind of step away, right? So a person comes at you to attack, you just do this number, and off they go, and they don't connect with you. So that's kind of the idea here, is not to get into the struggle with them. So withdraw from the power contest. If possible, leave the room. We do this in the hospital. If we have a child who's causing a lot of problems and they won't leave the room, we get all the other kids to leave and go to another room and leave the child there alone. So there's one thing that kids want, is to belong. And that's very painful for them to be abandoned. But it's appropriate because we gave them a choice to leave and they didn't, so everyone else left. Giving choices, back to giving choices, right? You can turn the computer off in 30 seconds, or you can turn it off in 1 minute. What would you prefer? 1 minute. Okay. It's a minute, right? We went over our time, 1 minute, but they turn it off, right? No fight. And then ways to encourage giving choices, let the child make decisions. And at other times, if you notice a child tends to be the type that wants to get into power struggles, is finding opportunities for them to cooperate, to help. Like, can you help me staple papers? Maybe not staple. Can you help me pass out the papers today? Can you help me pass out markers? You know, whatever little task you can give, they like to be able to help. And it gets them into the practice of helping. And so that's how you deal with power. Now some of you may be wondering, let's sidestep for a second. What happens if like there's a really problem kid? I can't just ignore that, right? Well, no, you don't always ignore. So as I take a tangent here, there's a concept called deciding who owns the problem. Okay? And that's on page 100. Everyone there? Okay, cooperation is working together. So when there are problems with kids, someone owns the problem. Sometimes we own it. Sometimes the child owns it. Sometimes we both own it. And there's a very easy checklist to decide who owns this problem. Okay? First question, are my rights being disrespected? Excuse me. Are my rights being disrespected? Okay? Could somebody get hurt? Or somebody else's belongings threatened? And is my child too young to be responsible for the problem? All right, so if you're doing a task and the child is too young to really understand it. All right, so that may be a problem. So if the answer to any of those questions is yes, then the grown-up owns the problem. Okay? But if the answer to every question is no, then the child owns the problem. And this is great because we grown-ups feel like we have to do what? Micromanage. We got to get in there and fix every, your kid comes home from school and they've had a bad day and they made a bad grade because they didn't turn something in on time, and we're just going to rush to the telephone and interrupt our entire evening to deal with this problem. But this checklist allows you to say, hang on a second, are my rights being disrespected? Not really. Is anyone going to get physically hurt? No. Is anyone's property just going to be threatened? No. And is the 10-year-old too young to be responsible for getting an assignment in on time? No. A 10-year-old should know. Okay? So all those answers to those questions is no. So who owns the problem? The grown-up or the child? The child owns the problem, and that takes you out of the responsibility of fixing it. Now you can be there. You can give what? An I statement, or you can give reflective listening, or you can, to the extent that you're able, offer support. But at the end of the day, the child owns that problem. But if a child is disrupting the class, okay, your rights or the other kids' rights are being disrespected because they're not benefiting from the lesson because this child over here has taken up all the oxygen. On the other hand, some of these other questions are no, the child is old enough, so really you both own it in that situation, and then you do have to intervene as the grown-up to try to take care of the situation. So the person who owns the problem is responsible for handling it. When there is a problem, you can choose to ignore, use iMessages, give choices, alternatives. Okay, so let's jump back for a second. Does that make sense? Who owns the problem? It's an excellent concept. All right, back to page 42. So we talked about power struggle, revenge. Now this is a tricky one. We don't like to be treated meanly, do we? Is meanly a word? It's a word. Meanly. Yeah. It's a word tonight, how's that? We don't like to be mistreated, especially by kids, we have an expectation for how they're going to treat us, and they treat us meanly or badly or disrespectfully. And what happens to us? How do we feel with that? We feel hurt because we have images of ourselves of how things should be, and now logically a child who's being disrespectful, a meteor's not going to fall out of the sky and hit me on the head, right? The kid is not hitting me with a folded up chair, but the words just kind of make their way and they hit that part that I have created inside, and that's the part that's painful. And then that of course creates disappointment or shame, and then anger for me or discouragement. All right, so this happened to me just today, actually. Believe it or not, I was treated rudely by a youth. Okay, back to page. See, this is, I warned you that I had 18 years of child psychiatry knowledge, but not terribly organized. It's no excuse. I shouldn't have an excuse. So I feel when I'm being targeted, angry, hurt, right? And my initial impulse is, one thing with shame is, with shame, there's different ways that we deal with shame. And there's actually something called the compass of shame. And on the east and west compass of shame is attacking others or attacking ourselves. And so when somebody treats us badly, we often want to do what back to them? Attack them. Verbally, of course, or corporally. So we want to attack the other person, but it's really in response to our own sense of hurt, our own sense of disappointment. And that's the way that we manage our sense of shame inside. We lower it by lowering the other. So you can't talk to me this way, I'll talk to you this way. Okay? And so by lowering the other person, I feel better. Okay. So what are some other ways of dealing with revenge? Refuse to feel hurt or angry. Again, recognize when you're feeling that way. Recognize that logically what's happening here is, the earth is not going to stop rotating because this kid just said this. Don't hurt the child back, of course. To be fair. Again, get back to who owns this problem. So obviously if a child is saying very mean things to you in a scenario where there's other kids around, you got to do something, right? Because that's not going to create an atmosphere for the others to want to learn. So what are some ways that you can address the situation immediately? I think that's probably what you're looking for tonight. So timeouts, right? Does everyone give timeouts in here? Or parks? We call them parks at the hospital. What's that?
Actually, our preschoolers do timeouts.
Timeouts at preschool? Okay. So timeouts, taking space. I call it real estate therapy. If two people are locked in conflict, the best thing to do is to put some real estate between them, because as long as you're locked in conflict, it's probably not going to get better. This is why there's such a thing as peace mediators, because two people locked in conflict just escalate with each other. So you want to create some real estate. You want to get away. That way the two people can settle down. I statements, giving choices. Again, it gets back to all of this. So now you're not acting as parents here, so
I like where it says help the child feel love. For the mere revenge is awaiting.
help the child feel loved, right? Because what does that do? The child is probably seeking revenge or is being vindictive because they're feeling which of these emotions? It's not because they're feeling joy. Yeah, maybe fear. Fear or shame, so they're feeling afraid. And so their way of dealing with fear is attack. Or maybe they're feeling shame because they feel humiliated all the time. They've felt humiliated all the time. That's kind of the way they were raised. They were raised to feel diminished. We get kids all the time who, they almost wish they were physically abused more than they were verbally. It's just some of the things that they're said, they're told throughout their entire lives. They can barely make eye contact, And so they have this internal, I always tell people we all walk around with some degree of shame. Whether it's, some of us have just a little clutch purse. I know what a clutch purse is. So a very small amount of shame, right? So maybe we had a few bumps and bruises during our development, but otherwise we had a pretty good youth and infancy and toddlerhood. But some people walk around with big suitcases, and those suitcases that take two people. And so every time there's any situation that creates disappointment or embarrassment, it's like everything in that suitcase gets spilled out onto the floor. And then huge shame reaction. And I wish I should have had my compass of shame. So what's the compass? The east and west pole? Attack others, right? You've seen a compass before. You know, not everything is Google Map. All right, so compass is north, south, east, and west. The important one for this is attack others, and that's what the child is doing, is they're attacking you. So back to your point about help the child feel loved. So the child's experiencing a lot of shame, which is overwhelming. So they're feeling anger, and they're going on that eastern pole of the compass, and they're attacking you. And so what you want to do is help the child feel loved. And so what are the emotions of love on this list? Joy, right? Joy is the emotion of connection, of communion, of belonging, of you're part of the group. And again, there's only so much space in a person's mind for emotion. So if they're feeling a lot of negativity, then joy or love is one way of crowding out the negative. And then interest. And so distraction. You ever see parents at airports waiting at a gate and they have a toddler that's screaming and crying and making everyone else around them miserable? I've learned to just ignore it because I work on a child and adolescent inpatient unit, so it's background noise for me. That's one of the great things about working there. So anyway, what are parents doing? They're getting everything out they can to distract the child. So you're creating interest, and temporarily that works. It's great. So where was I going with that? Was there a point to that? Oh, yeah. Thank you. So again, at other times, pay attention to when the child is doing something positive and reinforce that. Build trust. Build that relationship. Okay? All right. Display of inadequacy. This is not one. Parents don't often come rushing to a child psychiatrist's office because their child is displaying inadequacy. You know, it's not the most common complaint. You know what the number one reason that parents show up at my office? This sounds like the beginning of a joke, but it's not. The school bus. There is nothing more aggravating to a parent than to suddenly have to take their kid to school, you know? So that'll get you to a child psychiatrist's office. But not inadequacy. So this is not one we see very often, but it's very important because even though the child is being quiet, it's still kind of a problem if they're giving up or not trying. So this gets to noticing moments when they do seem to be trying and to encourage effort and not giving up. Focusing on a child's strengths. My first question to any person I see, whether it's an adult or a child, is, here I go again giving away my secrets. I shouldn't do this, but tell me some things that you're good at. I don't start with why are you here or what's your problem. I start with let's talk about some of your strengths. So right away we're talking about strengths. Sort of like when I reinforced how you were really doing what you needed to do. It's too much work for me to have to change a person. So I have to find the strength that they're already exhibiting and build on that. So. All right, did that make sense? So whenever a child is misbehaving, think to yourself, all right, usually it's going to be the top three. Is this child seeking attention? Are we in a power struggle here? Or is this child having shame-based anger? It's shame-based anger is what this is. Or fear-based anger toward me. Okay, so that's your first step, is to stop and think, what's the goal of this misbehavior? How am I feeling? And that'll kind of tell me. And again, if it's just seeking attention, all right, the first thing you do is decide who's really owning this problem. Is this a problem that I really need to step in and do something about? If it's not a problem you have to really own and the child is just seeking attention, what's the proper strategy? Ignore. Isn't that great? You can just ignore it. It takes no energy. Ignore, but at other times, focus on when the child is doing something right. Because what they're seeking is attention, so you want to give them attention when they're doing something right. All right, if you're in a power struggle and you feel angry and you find yourself just giving in or scolding, or then do the judo, right? Sidestep, don't allow yourself to get in the power struggle. Give choices, communication, I statements, reflective listening. And that goes for attention too. And then with revenge, not allowing yourself to get hurt. Again, sidestepping and letting the content pass by, and giving yourself a few moments to pause before you react and pay attention to how you're feeling. And then get back to the communication skills, choices, and then praising when they're doing something right, or building up those positive emotions of interest and joy as much as you're able to through interesting activities and communion. Any other questions? How are we doing? Go ahead.
What age is this kind of going down to? Like, 'cause I know a lot of this stuff really wouldn't apply to a 3-year-old, because I don't feel like they're necessarily times they're doing it for revenge. Maybe they're just trying to let off some energy, and it doesn't seem like they're doing it to even seek attention when they are running around the room. Even though I'm saying, stop running. And clearly this is my problem, because if they hurt themselves, it's on me, or they're hurt somebody else. So it doesn't seem like they're doing this for any particular reason other than just to run, which is fine, but then they get followers and the whole room seems to be running around. And I mean, timeout I don't use, but that could be one thing. I don't know that I have enough corners, though, in the classroom for all of the timeouts that I'll need to do. But
right.
What age do you think this goes down to? Maybe like kindergarten age and up, or a lot of this stuff I totally am going to use at home. I love all of it. But for a 3-year-old or a toddler age.
That's an excellent question, and there was a couple of things I wanted to point out. First thing is hyperactivity. So the point of hyperactivity is it generates energy for the brain to focus. And so the reason why there is such a thing as hyperactive children compared to other kids who are not hyperactive is the hyperactive child isn't getting enough of something, maybe dopamine, who knows. And so by moving around a lot, they're providing that to themselves. And so research has shown, this is very interesting, you would never believe that a child who is constantly fidgeting and moving around is actually paying attention, because studies show that they're actually absorbing as much as the child who's sitting really quietly. It's just that child listens by moving around a lot. And so the medication that sometimes is used supplies the movement, but really and truly, if the child were just moving around and if the teacher could kind of ignore that this was happening, then really the kid is absorbing. And actually some classrooms have these devices set up where the child can move their feet under the desk. Yeah, so you've seen this. And so that's what's happening really, is the hyperactivity is providing the energy to the brain to pay attention. And compared to others, they need that extra activity. Now for a 3-year-old, you know, once you get down to a certain age level, they're really not developmentally able to sit still and pay attention. You know, humans, spiders do what? They build webs almost as soon as they're hatched from an egg. Birds build nests. So we humans, we do several things. We like to be in a relationship. So babies are immediately getting in a relationship, and then toddlers, what do? They're fascinated by everything. They have interest, and they want to see, they want to do. And so it almost may be a developmental task that's too much for 3-year-olds. So yeah, you want to match the task to what they're developmentally able to do. Kindergarten, I'd say 7 would be the age that I would say, all right, now there's an expectation. You know, certain countries in Europe, they don't even expect kids to go to school until like age 7. In the United States, it's like 5. You need to go to school. And many times I have asked a parent to just hold their kid out of school. Like they put a child in at age 5, and the kid is wiggling, squiggling, and causing lots of problems. Child is learning that they're different and a problem. So they're starting to internalize that. So sometimes the solution is to hold them out a year and start again next year. Not every parent is happy to hear that advice, and sometimes it's actually not the best advice because the home isn't very supportive, and so you kind of want them in school as much as you can. But 7, I would say, is old enough where, yeah, you can expect sitting and paying attention for 45 minutes or so. And then giving them opportunities to move around, even if it's standing up, you know. Does anyone else think, besides me, that there's not enough recess anymore in school? All right. So I hope there's no school administrators in here. No?
Well, thank you very much.
All right.
Anybody have any questions?
I wanted to make one more comment about the timeout. Yeah, timeouts are not always the greatest strategy because timeouts do what? They cause separation. And so that's just sort of a last effort if you just have to have order in the class and you have to not allow the other kids to be. But it's actually sometimes not the best thing because it creates more separation and creates more shame and disappointment. So that's something to think about.
So talking about children and their movements, but yet they're still paying attention and learning this. So how would you suggest that a classroom would look like as far as the approach to teaching? I mean, is it stations? Is it activity driven? How long should they be expected to go, hey, let's sit down, pay attention, listen to this story? Some kind of idea there.
Yeah, I think all of those options. I mean, obviously trying the most efficient way of giving the material that you can, but very quickly teachers will discover that that's not working. So then trying those other things like the stations. And so give that a shot. What was there was another one you mentioned?
I was just trying to compare, advantages, disadvantages of moving from station to station. How long I think sometimes if we're dealing with a child that can't sit down, pay attention like we expect them to, both feet on the floor, that sort of thing. And that's the only way we know to teach. We create kind of a battleground there sometimes. And so what is the expectation? How long should we expect a child to be able to sit down, pay attention to that?
Not very long. There's probably a very mathematical graph that goes down in time depending on the age of the child. So even a teenager should be able to sit for a fair amount of time. I think some classes now are 90 minutes is probably too long, isn't it? I'd say, how long have we been here tonight? So So,
The minute per 8, like here,
Yeah,
is
that's
it
what
like
they
3
say.
minutes?
Their age, plus or minus a few minutes. Like each 4-year-old, the longest they ever sit still is 4 minutes.
Like, I'm pretty quick with that less.
4 minutes.
I mean, I can
They have a
roll
chance
less
to
than
talk,
that for
they
a
have
minute.
a chance to move every 4 minutes.
yeah, I would just be encouraged that if they are moving around a lot, they're absorbing. So,
As long as they're not screaming.
as long as they're not screaming, right?
Screaming is where I have a problem.
Yeah, that gets to the distress, right? Because
Yeah, there's distress, but they're happy about it. There's a lot of noise in that scream.
but it's distress for grown-ups because after you've listened to that all day long, you're
Your frustrations are very different than us that have the older kids. And I think as older kids, we have to remember if those kids are struggling at church, they're probably struggling at school and they're struggling at home. And we as the church have to approach it differently because we want them to accept Jesus. And we have to, it's a very fine line. If they're scared of us or they think we're mean or whatever, we've just ruined Jesus.
yeah.
When
Great
they have
point.
to know that they're loved, they have to know that we're different than faith is.
That's a great point. So your approach is going to be different, I think, than school, and that's again back to the timeout. That might not always be the best thing because you're symbolically pushing them out, and so it's not easy. You guys have a real difficult job. So I applaud all of you for taking on this challenge. But you're right. You have that overriding goal of the message. So.
Answer to someone who just says we only have them for 45 minutes a week, we're not gonna make a difference in their life.
It's
So
not true.
Yeah, I would disagree because, 45 minutes a week, I only see children 30 minutes every month, often. 45 minutes a week is a good amount of time to have, again, to show them a different way, to let them experience something different than what they're used to. Because you never know what you say or what happens that the child will remember. At our hospital, we have it set up that we try to make it a very positive experience, and some people find that strange. Says, why would you want to make the hospital fun? Shouldn't it be something they don't want to do? But really what I'm doing is this is one time in their life when they can belong, when they can be heard. Someone will pay attention to them and they can have a good experience. So when they go back home to their environment, they can at least remember that when I was there, somebody listened to me. And I think that memory can be very powerful. So I think that's what I would say is you never know the good you're doing and what they're absorbing. And so this is a different experience for them that can have a huge impact. So just tell them Dr. Miller said. So no, I think it's wonderful what you're doing here. And that's a lot of time, 45 minutes an hour a week. What's the usual time that, when you go to the doctor, how much time do you spend? It's like 5 minutes or something, right? That's every year.
In the Sunday school class, they're getting more individual attention than they get at school. In school, these kids got 25 kids in their class and one adult.
I got 29.
See? So that means you never know.
29 kids.
It can make a big difference.
You guys are doing wonderful work. I really applaud you, and I'm so appreciative of the time that my kids had at Sunday school and Vacation Bible School. I think it's definitely made an impact on them. Just seeing them as they're all pretty much adults now. 18 counts as an adult, doesn't it? I think you can vote. 8. But I can see as an adult, it's like I wasn't responsible for all of that. I know some other grown-ups had a role to play in helping them get to, some of the things that I see them do and say it's pretty cool. So you never know the lasting impact you have. So.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.